Hi folks, John Dunn here, RPG freelancer, publisher behind Melia. I am up here today at Immortals Inc. with Mikey.
What's going on today, John?
Well, today we are going to be brave and daring once more as we talk about the Tales of the Valiant Player's Guide, right? So we covered the Game Master's Guide previously, and now we did finally manage to get some copies of the Player's Guide and Monster Vault in.
Finally!
Yes. And so we're going to talk about the Player's Guide today. Celeste Konowich, again, led a big team. I mentioned her previously as having worked on the Game Master's Guide. She also worked on Book of Ebon Tides that we talked about previously. This was a May 23 Kickstarter. It raised over $1 million, had more than 10,000 backers. That Kickstarter did also fund the Monster Vault book. The Game Master's Guide was a separate Kickstarter from those two. Again, this was a response to the OGL changes. It uses the 5.1 SRD under Creative Commons, but it is organized fairly differently from the 2014 Player's Handbook. It starts off with a very brief role-playing intro and then dives right into character creation. It's about 20 pages on that. I really like the way this is put together. It is a very functional and focused overview of how role-playing works. It's not a ton of pages. It's not the ultimate resource, but it's concise. And it also presents the basic die mechanics. So you kind of get some idea of how the game works before you're making a character. You're not getting every detail possible, but they tell you, these are the dice. This is how you're going to roll it. Very simple, very straightforward.
I like that. For someone like me.
I mean, I like to have, when I'm picking up a new game, I like to have some idea of how the game works before I get to, okay, now you're going to make a character. Mm-hmm. It gives me some perspective on what I'm doing when I'm creating the character. And then it touches on stats, what a character sheet looks like, and just gives you the steps in both creating a character and leveling up a character. And leveling up, for as much as that's a thing that happens in Dungeons & Dragons and D20-based games, a lot of times that'll just be at some random page midway through the book. And so you end up scrabbling, or you stick a Post-it or a bookmark in there to find it. This is right at the beginning. It's about 10 pages in, so that you can find that pretty easily. I thought that was smart. It's also, there's a couple of distinctive pieces of artwork right around there so that you can find that page fast. So right after that, we get into character classes. This is a big chunk of the book. We got 84 pages covering our character classes. We've got Barbarian, Bard, Cleric, Druid, Fighter, Monk, Paladin, Ranger, Rogue, Sorcerer, Warlock, Wizard. These are all names that sound familiar. Those are all right out of the 5e SRD. But then there's also Mechanist. So this is the crazy guy that's building stuff. Your inventor, essentially. And so that is a new one. The other thing that I thought was pretty cool is that they explicitly have subclasses that are called subclasses for each and every one of these classes. So even the monk and the fighter get subclasses.
Nice.
And, you're not using a different term or path or some weird name for every single class. They're always called subclasses. Also, a nice thing that's rolled into these character class write-ups is that there's some player advice. Basically, kind of a straight shooter thing telling you, hey, this is how this is going to work. You may want to do this. You don't have to follow the advice. Maybe that doesn't suit your play style, but it's there for you to decide whether you want to follow it or ignore it. And that's in a sidebar that's very clearly called out for all the classes. And in addition to the player advice, there's a quick build sidebar. If you don't want to spend a ton of time trying to figure out how to do this or how to do that, you can just go through the quick build and get your character up and running faster. Next chunk of the book, 12 pages, is Lineage and Heritage. And these are what we would have called races or species, more or less. Lineage gives you an age, size, speed, and traits. They're really focused. We're not doing a ton of world building here. Instead, we're only getting about half a page for each of these lineages. The lineages include Beastkin, which is kind of a generalized anthropomorphic. So if you want to have a bird person or a bear person or a cat person, all of those are going to be beastkin. We've got dwarf, elf, human, kobold, orc, Sidarian, which is kind of your extraplanar or maybe half extraplanar, so your tiefling equivalent-ish. And then small folk, which are, again, kind of a generalized, maybe it's a gnome, maybe it's a halfling. Again, not a ton of world building going on here. We're getting just a little bit of background for each of these. And then once you've chosen that lineage, you have your heritage, and this is your cultural background. So maybe you're a beastkin that comes from a militant group, right? Militant nation or militant city-state. So that's going to be different than a dwarf that comes from an agricultural area. And those heritage give you a language, a skill, and some kind of special ability. I like the fact that this is set up to be very open, so you can mix and match your lineage with your heritage, and you can kind of build in more if you want to with all of those elements. I think this would fit well with the campaign builder stuff we've talked about, and I think this gives a ton of wiggle room for the game master to homebrew their campaign setting, or for, third-party products to grab a campaign setting and run with it and add in all of these elements to do more world building later. The key is none of this is going to get in your way. Backgrounds and talents are the next section, about 16 pages. Talents, skills, language, and proficiency, those all come from your background. Talents are more or less feats, right? And they're broken down into magical, martial, and technical. Next big chunk of the book, about 70 pages, is equipment and magic items. We get armor, we get weapons, toolkits, and I really like the way toolkits are set up. They're kind of linked into different skills, so you don't just have a thieves toolkit. There's toolkits for a whole broad range of different skills here. Mounts, services, and also vehicles. So we do get some vehicle rules explicitly spelled out here, which is cool. And then we get magic items, and magic items are another 45 pages. There's some design notes on how magic items are set up. There's some rules for purchasing and selling magic items. And then there's a brief section included in those 45 pages of fabled magic items. These are basically relics or, artifacts. Just a few examples. Not going to be everything. Again, I feel like those kinds of relics or artifacts are something that would tie in better to world building and your campaign setting rather than being something that, well, it's in everybody's game, right? Mm-hmm. Playing the game gets 35 pages after that. We see some situational rules, including combat and social encounters. I do think this section is very well organized where things just kind of flow next to the next to the next. Nice reference artwork so that it's pretty easy to get through this chapter and see how these different elements all tie together. There's also some good downtime rules for things like crafting, research, training, and, working. So if your characters have a side hustle in between adventures, that's covered here. Last big chunk of the book, 86 pages, is spell casting. Spells are broken down into arcane, divine, primordial, and weird spells. And then they're ranked in circles instead of levels. So one of the common critique in D&D is that when you talk about level, well, do you mean this level or that level? They broke that down here with spells. So spells, instead of having a level, have a circle number. Just find it less confusing. I think that's a good way to go. There's some appendices after that. The first one is conditions, just a couple of pages that give you the overview of what the basic conditions are that might happen to characters, primarily in combat. Pantheons, so you get some sample deities and some instructions on how to set up sample deities, including some mythological ones that are well established. So I believe Greek and Norse are both mentioned in here, just as a reference for how you might set those up if you're building your own pantheon or if you want to use one of those older mythical ones. And then a few creatures. This is not a monster book at all, but it gives you creatures that might be familiars or might be mounts. Just a little bit of a reference work so that the player, if they're playing, say, a druid and want to be able to transform into some monsters, they don't need to have a monster manual on hand as well. There's a 5-page index and a character sheet after it. This is 380 pages. It's a hardcover. It's full color. Kobold Press, $60. Got copies here on the shelf at Immortals, or again, immortalsinkonline.com. Solid, beautiful book, and really a great alternative to picking up a D&D 5e book.
Very well said, John. It looks awesome. See you guys next time. Check it out below.
Till next time, folks. Good gaming.